Sure.
All right. Let's see. And we'll thank you all for joining us. This is my good friend Sean joining us from Miami Gnosis. We're going to talk today about karma and the law of attraction. So, first, we want to do a sound check. I want to check in with those of you that are on Facebook if you can hear Sean.
The funny thing is, we already did this and it was working fine. And now it's
Yeah,
not
I know.
working.
Okay. All right. I think we're good. I think it's working now. I can hear you on Facebook. So anyone
Okay,
on
excellent.
Facebook, if you can just let me know if you can hear Sean. Sean, if you can just say hello.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Just want to see if everybody can hear me. Um, and if
And
there are, okay, I see comments on Instagram, but I don't see any Facebook
okay.
comments.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So let me actually go into my.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So I think we're good.
All right.
Awesome. Great. All right. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback and being part of our sound system check crew.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Josh, how's it going? Josh is one of our students, actually.
Oh, okay. Have a few students joining. Eva, Adina, welcome. Thank you for joining. All right. I just have to do one more thing here on my end. Um, I just want to share this conversation that's happening now live to one of the Facebook groups. So let me just do that real quick, and then we'll start. Um, we'll start the talk. Boom. Okay. Uh, we're starting a watch party. That's what it's called now on Facebook.
Okay.
Great. All right. And okay, so we're live. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Instagram. Again, thank you all for joining us. Welcome. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Wanted to thank Sean for taking some time and joining us to talk about this very, very interesting and important topic, which is karma and also the law of attraction. I think Sean, with everything that's going on around us, right? I think it's a perfect time to talk about all this. Because it's been my my personal experience, and I'm sure it has been yours as well. And uh, that when we come to the Gnostic studies, we begin to study, right, life and the purpose of life and the meaning of life and the different laws um, that are in the universe and that affect us and that influence us. And so when I came to Gnosis, this topic allowed me to expand my concept, right, about this natural law that we all know, right, which is the law of cause and effect. Many of us, though, most of us, I think, have the perspective that karma is sort of this thing that happens to bad people, right? And we have this concept that karma is the bad things that happen to us, and then there's this other word called dharma that's like the good things that happen to us. And so we want to expand a little bit on those topics today, and that um, not so that we can have this sense of victimhood or victimization, but to understand, right, how these laws work and how they actually can help us um, not only expand our perception of life, our perception of reality, but also to help us live in a more conscious way, right? And so, um, one of the first topics that we want to talk about, or actually, one of the first things that I want to mention before we get into deeper, is that this conversation will be from the perspective, what we call the fourth way perspective, from a spiritual perspective, right? That this conversation is the center of gravity of this conversation is based on this perception that life and the physical world around us is a school for the soul, right? We came here to learn more about ourselves, to learn about life manifesting in this plane, and that therefore creation, for at least from an esoteric point of view, creation is sort of a mirror where we can contemplate and know ourselves, right? And so following this perception, then creation and physical life as we know it is not just a means. It's just a means, sorry, but not an end, right? That this is not the goal of life is not to just come here and experience, just live 60 or 50 years or 80 years, and then that's it, right? There's a purpose behind all of this, and that's one of the things that, to me, studying for years this law of karma, or cause and effect, has helped me realize, right? And so from a Gnostic perspective, karma is one of the aspects of karma is to help us understand the interconnectedness that we all share, the interconnectedness between everything in the universe, right? And that nothing is isolated, and that everything affects everything else or everyone else, right? And so, yeah, Sean, I want to invite you to, so you can share some of your reflections and experiences with this a very interesting concept, right, that we call karma.
Yeah, thank you. Karma is interesting. Before I got into the Gnostic studies, I of course had heard of the word karma and a little bit about the concept before, and I think I had the same idea that most other people did, that karma is kind of a punishment. When you do things, you will receive a sort of punishment for doing the bad things that you do. And I never really considered it to be anything positive whatsoever, or in all actuality, as it is, more neutral than anything else. As I've come to understand over the years of studying myself really more deeply, is that karma is neutral. Karma is a mechanical law of the universe that has no agenda other than to fulfill its own purpose, which is to balance the universe. Because if you consider it like this, really everything in the end comes back down to the being. And it comes back down to that first cause of life, that moment before the first cause. And the being before creation, and again, when we consider these things, it's hard really for us to grasp these concepts, because we tend to try to grasp these concepts from within creation, because we don't have any other choice but to do that, because we're inside of creation right now. Right. However, our true nature is something separate from creation in and of itself. And so that's one of the things that I really love about these teachings, is that it helps us to understand that, yes, we are here in creation, but also we exist outside of creation as we know it, simply due to our very own nature. And so, coming from that outside of creation perspective, before creation existed, there really was no need for cause and effect, because there was nothing to make a cause and nothing to have an effect. Creation itself created cause and effect. And through an action within creation, it's a natural consequence and a neutral consequence that an effect has to come back to then rebalance what that original cause took out of balance. Now, if we think to the Kabbalah for a moment, which is a map of our internal universe, or a map of the universe of creation, there's this area at the very top of the Kabbalah called the absolute abstract space. And even the deepest aspect of that is something called the ayin, the very first, that thing which is an unmanifested version of itself, or God, or the being, or creator, or nature, or whatever you want to call it. But this unmanifested version, because of its very nature, there's nothing within it to cause any reaction of cause and effect, any reaction of karma. But the moment it expresses itself in any degree, it throws itself out of balance. And what happens is it swings this pendulum, which then, if we look at any pendulum, what's going to happen when we push a pendulum is it's going to swing back to the degree of which it was thrown out of balance in the first place. And it goes one way and then goes another way and then goes back the other way and goes back the other way. And this is what karma is. It's as simple as that. It is just the cause is the first push, and then the effect is the push back. And then that effect becomes the next cause, which is another push, and then that effect is the push back. So really, karma itself is this, it's a process of mechanicity within this universe of creation within which we live. However, it's guided by pure intelligence. The principles which guide karma themselves, the principles of the law, are incredibly intelligent. Those principles, if we can call them they, which I will for the duration of this talk, but
Right.
they have intelligence to be able to see the effects of that cause and then do the math in a way that will rebalance those effects in the opposite manner. For instance, life after life after life, we may come back one time as a man and another time as a woman to help to balance that out. But really, what this is all coming down to is that karma itself is something that brings us back into balance. Karma, as you said before, is, I don't know if you mentioned it before when we were talking yesterday, but it's a medicine, as Master Samael tells us. Because when we go out of balance, if we find ourselves sick, how do we get back to healthy again? Well, we take a medicine. And karma is that exact same thing. It's a medicine which brings us back into balance with the universe around us and creation all around us and the universe within us. However, the condition we're in now, where we have so much ego that's blocking our light, is that when we receive that medicine and we're brought back into balance, the ego takes that and then tends to overdo it and throws it right back out of balance again. The interesting thing about creation is that creation itself is a lack of balance. Because if the moment before creation is nothing, it's not balanced, it's not out of balance, it's not anything created, it's actually nothing even uncreated. It's something that really is incomprehensible to our mind.
Yeah.
The moment creation comes into play, that itself is a lack of balance, because there's all these forces which tug and pull and push and pull and try to make themselves known and expressed. And in doing so, it throws something else out of balance, which creates this chain reaction, which is where we get that axiom that a butterfly flapping its wings in China can create a typhoon in Australia, or however you want to say it.
Right.
Because the tiniest little cause creates an effect somewhere else. I've contemplated karma and the law of karma for a long time, and I've tried to see it in my life and how, the way that I was when I was younger and the things that happened to me and why those things might have happened to me and why I might have done the things that I did and where I am today. And it's interesting that as we develop as children, Master Samael is correct. By the time we reach like 7 or 8 years old, we are basically completely developed, and then we're just exaggerating that development throughout the rest of our life. The personality traits that we have are those personality traits that we continue to carry with us through the rest of our life, unless we do something to change that, unless we turn around and start to swim back up the stream. Because if we just allow ourselves in a mechanical nature to follow that law of mechanicity back and forth, what's going to happen is we're going to be like that log on a raging ocean that has no way to direct itself or steer itself. Karma comes and pushes us this way, and then the effect of that karma comes and pushes us back that way. And it's easy to see, it's really easy to see when we're looking at it in kind of a big picture with societies or movements or various things that are happening around us. But sometimes it's a lot harder to see it from where we are, from our own perspective, inside of ourselves, because we're so close to ourselves that we don't give ourselves an opportunity to stand back and really just observe. We're caught up in the effects of those things with which we caused in the first place. Now, in order for us to be able to really stand back and be able to see with the consciousness this back and forth motion within ourselves without being swept up in all of the problems that it can entail if it's lived mechanically, we have to allow ourselves to stop and observe ourselves. This is the first key that we give in any class, Tracy and I'm sure with almost everybody else as well. It's the first key that we give because it's the most important key that we have. It's the one key that's going to follow us all the way back to the reabsorption of the I am, is the key of self-observation. Because what is self-observation? Self-observation is bringing us into this very moment. And this moment, being the only one that exists, can only be accessed through self-observation. And we have to initiate that. If we don't initiate self-observation, we cannot then have self-reflection, which is a natural outcome of self-observation. From self-reflection comes comprehension. And it's interesting, Christian, because Tracy and I have actually been going over this. We've been doing in our classes the seminar of interiorization. And it's such a beautiful seminar. We did this in Savannah as well. And we love it. Every time we do it, both Tracy and I go much, much deeper on our own work, and the students also. And really, what it comes down to, and there's a lot to it, obviously, but what it comes down to is the fact that we need to be able to be here in this very moment to understand anything and everything that goes on around us and inside of us. If we aren't living our lives with direct self-observation, to the best of our ability, of course, because it's in the state we're in, we can't be expected to do it all the time. That would be unfair. But to the best of our abilities, if we take the time and make the efforts to observe those things that we like about ourselves as well as those things that we don't like about ourselves, when we take that time, then we'll begin to start seeing the reactions and the chain reactions that take place during karma, during those karmic happenings that go on in our life. And really, only when we start to see the karmic reactions that are happening in our life will we then be able to begin to understand those karmic reactions that are happening to society or the life of our family, really, because society is our family. Every single one of us that are here on this planet today are family. And we can even go bigger than that, but let's keep it kind of, easy to comprehend and easy to be able to process within our brains. We are part of a family here. And anytime we take part in an action, that action is going to have consequences all around us. And until we start to truly self-observe, which sounds, honestly, it sounds so basic, but it's also so deep, because self-observation is that one thing that will be able to give us the answers that we need for anything we're looking for. Now, with karma and the law of attraction, okay, we're obviously physical creatures. That's easy to see. We live in a physical world. We can hurt ourselves, we can heal ourselves, we can throw things and it hits something else and it bounces off. It's obviously physical. There's some state of a solidity to it. But we are also incredibly psychological. And I would even be willing to say that we're more psychological than we are physical. Science is now coming out. What's that? Yeah, absolutely. Science is now, for a little while now, but more so lately, they've been coming out with these theories in quantum physics that really, in all reality, there almost isn't even physicality, because even the very atoms that we have inside of our body have space in between them. and that space is as comparable to the stars in the heavens. And even each atom itself is almost nothing solid anyway. It's an electron, a couple of neutrons, and protons and such. And so those things, psychology, and also the electrons themselves, have a magnetism to them. Psychology, the way psychology works within us, and let me say this too. Tracy and I always like to say this, and okay, let me say that I'm still coming to understand in my own work how these processes work within myself, as we all are. We all are undergoing our own processes. And so whenever we say anything, Tracy or I, we like to tell our students this. Take it as we say it, and then question it. Take it apart, understand it, and do so with your heart.
Right.
We can do so with our minds, but the brain tends to be so bogged down with concepts and ideas and judgments that it can be really hard. We can way over intellectualize things. But the way that anybody can stay safe with the things that they receive is to question everything.
Right.
The being loves questions. You absolutely observe it. And the being loves questions. That's the reason we're here, because the being is questioning itself. It wants to know itself, so it creates a question about itself, and we are that answer to the question. The ego does not like questions. The ego thinks it likes to know. The ego thinks it knows what it's talking about. And so the ego will always, be like, no, wait, don't question what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? I'm speaking, this, and this. No, the being wants those questions. So question. I mean, even Master Samael fixes his own errors, because he has even said before, we have written proof in books. He says something one time, and then he's like, well, you know what? I understand it differently now. My awareness is greater, and I've grown more. And basically what he's saying is, I wasn't quite fully complete there, and now here I have more of a completion.
Right.
So the law of attraction, really, we know the law of attraction as the law of magnetism as well. We know that electrons and atoms magnetize towards each other. So physically speaking, that's how we're held together. We're held together with the law of attraction. However, psychologically speaking, we draw to ourselves people who are very similar to us psychologically.
Right.
And so using the mirror of karma in conjunction with the law of attraction, we can really begin to see who we are deep down inside by noticing those people who are around us, and then using that moment of noticing that person to then turn that observation back inside and try to look at somebody else and say, look at the way that person makes us feel. We see somebody who, let's say they get cut off in traffic. We're in a car, and then the car in front of us gets cut off, and then we all go to a stoplight, and then that person, yells at the person that cut them off. And we could be sitting in the car, and we're like, man, I can't believe they're yelling like that. I would never do that, And we see how that makes us feel. Okay, now when we're observing it, are we just observing it and then going on with our life? Or are we observing it and then judging that person? Oh, I can't believe that. I wouldn't do anything like that, Or, man, if I was them, I'd get out and punch them, or whatever it would be, whatever reaction we have on the inside.
Right.
Now, if we are just observing life as it is and then moving forward, it's not sticking to us, we're not judging, we're not holding on to it, chances are that it's not as strong within us. It may be in there somewhere, but it's not as strong within us because it's not really having a serious effect.
Right.
However, if we find ourselves judging either of those two people, or saying I would be so much worse, or it stays with us for moments later or hours later, or even we have memories that are years old sometimes, and it comes back to us, that's a sure indication that we have also within us that we're not paying attention to that same aspect, that same psychological aspect. And the reason that that situation was drawn toward us was due to the law of attraction, because like attracts like.
Right. So,
Um,
Sean, I want to
yeah,
just jump in and mention a couple of
sure.
things because some of the things that you're mentioning, and this last thing that you're mentioning in particular reminds me of this quote by Carl Jung, which sort of puts us in touch with this concept that we have in the Gnostic tradition that Master Samael brought light to, or shone light into, which is this concept of the occult side of the moon, right? And that um, Carl Jung says, remember everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding about ourselves. And I found that such a powerful quote, because indeed, uh, like you were saying, right, everything that we are experiencing, we are attracting in some way or another. And by bringing awareness to all of that, we can finally begin to liberate ourselves. And I think someone asked the questions like, how do we get to that point where we're not, I don't want to say affected, but um, uh, in Buddhism, this is, and the Eastern traditions, this is where the concept of Dharma comes into place, right? That Dharma is that which liberates us from this wheel that I have here in the back, this wheel of samsara, this wheel of cause and effect, this wheel of the wheel of retribution, if you want to call it, right? The arcana number 10 of the tarot. And the way to liberate ourselves from all of that is through the Dharma. And what is the Dharma? The Dharma is, as you were saying before, self-observation leads to comprehension of ourselves, and that comprehension leads to awakening. Yeah. And that's how we liberate ourselves from it, right? So the Dharma is the awakening. So, and we were just talking about with the group about, we just finished talking about mindfulness, right? And observing oneself and bringing awareness. And like you mentioned in the beginning, just the mere act of bringing awareness, that mere act of bringing awareness allows you to begin to comprehend, right? To expand and to also see the relationship that exists between you and that which you're observing, between you and the events of life, right? And so getting back to what I said in the beginning, also, I think, I was just trying to sort of connect everything together. This is, again, the wonderful thing about this transcendental law of karma that allows us to see the relationship between all things. As I always remember also Leonardo da Vinci saying, learn to see, realize that everything relates to everything else. And the reason why life is conflicting to us is because we don't understand, right, how this thing relates to that, right? And so the moment we begin to observe, the moment we begin to comprehend, now we begin to see the relationship between me and that like you were saying, the butterfly effect, right? That every single action, every little thing that I do has an impact in the world around me. And so how can I, of course, it's invited me to reflect, through all the time. Every single action, well, honestly speaking, I can't meditate on every single action. But when I do a retrospective exercise of my day at the end of the night, at the end of the day, I'd be like, all right, let me evaluate myself, right? And and I go through, at least the most the things that I was able to see, and say, all right, well, how, this conversation, where did that go? How did that impact my relationship with that person, my relationship with the world? And could I have said it better, right? Or was there something missing, and so forth? And so in that process, right, you begin to bring more awareness, and then you begin to see, right, little things that you say, okay, well, maybe I can do this better next time. And I can see how this little word over here created this massive emotional reaction, right, on this person, and I just could have said it in a different way, or or even not say it at all, right?
Yeah.
um, and I think also, one of the wonderful things about this concept of the occult side of the moon is to that it helps us to bring awareness to the fact that I am the other, right? And there's this interesting concept that, like, technically there is no other, and so if we think like that, the other is you, right? And
Yeah.
so we can use that to understand ourselves even better. Um, and I think, now in these times where, because we get these, it's another point that I wanted to talk to you about, is this concept of what I mentioned to you before, conscious activism, right? Like everything that's going on, and we know now, knowing that that every single thing that we do has an impact on the world around us. Well, how can we consciously, actively change the world, right?
Yeah.
And obviously the simple, I think, teaching is the most famous one, is Gandhi, right? Be the change that you want to see in the world. And
Yeah.
and uh, and according to, so if we're examining, right, karma from this perspective, that's a mirror. One of the things that has helped me is this concept again of the occult side of the moon, as Master Samuel explains. You, whatever you see in the other, it's you, the good things and the bad things, right? And
Yeah.
so um, this is wonderful because, in a situation like this, just to relate this to what we're living, many people obviously would see themselves as, um, I see this horrible tragedy, what's happening, and we can say that the ego within us, or even just the consciousness within us, obviously feels empathy, but also we can feel angry at what's happening. But we can sort of detach ourselves very easily from me and, for example, the cop that did this to George Floyd, for instance, right? And so it's invited me to say, okay, so if everything is a reflection of myself, right, as the sort of the law of attraction, what is it about me that I am seeing in this person? And it takes a lot of courage,
Right.
to put yourself in that spot. But then you begin to see. I said, all right, well, this cop is, obviously, um, intolerance, violence, right, sense of aggression. And then I asked myself, well, do I have those things within myself? Maybe maybe not to that extreme. But when was the last time that I made a joke, a sarcastic joke, right, um, that hurt someone, which is an act of violence? It's an act of aggression. It's an act of intolerance, right? When
Yeah.
was the last time that I saw someone as below me, and I feel that I'm better because I have all these ideas, all these concepts, all these theories, right? And so it's interesting to, I think it takes, obviously, a lot of observation, right, meditation, to see how all of that relates to you, and again, and it takes
Yeah.
a lot of courage, right, to see that. And so then, one of the things that I was mentioning to you is like, and one of the questions that I get from my students all the time is, how can I consciously do something right now in everything that's happening? And I say, well, it's hard, it's hard to say to someone that you are helping the world by just sitting here and meditating, because it seems like we're doing nothing, right?
Right.
But in fact, we're doing so much, right? By getting rid of those things within you that brought all of this in the first place,
That's
you're
exactly right.
actively changing the world. So I call this, conscious activism, which is, what we call it when we say Gnosis, right? The psychological death.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you want to say anything in relation to that, or.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It almost seems counterintuitive to sit down and do nothing. But in all reality, that's exactly what we need to learn how to do, because the issue with trying to fix problems is that right now we only know how to come through the ego to try to fix problems because we don't have the connection with the being.
Mm,
However, and I'll return back to self-observation for just a moment. When we observe ourselves throughout our life, we can observe ourselves trying to make those external actions, trying to make those, decisions that we think we can use to fix problems that are going on around us, like social activism or political activism or educational activism or whatever it is that we want to be a part of and change around us. When we observe ourselves doing those things, if we're being honest, we can see that we're being guided by fear deep down inside, because we're afraid of the way things are. We're afraid that if things continue on, somehow everything's going to fall apart. Everything, there's no stability anywhere. So what we actually need to do, exactly what you were saying, is learn to stop and just breathe. That's one of the most important things we can possibly ever learn to do. Stop and breathe. And allow the thinking process to exhaust itself. Imagine our mind like a muddy jar of water, a jar of muddy water, and we shake it up and we can't see through it. It just, it's dirty and cloudy. But then we set it down and let all the dirt settle. Okay? What we have at the bottom is this thick goop, but up top we have clarity. And this is what happens to us when we start to practice meditation. When we sit down to breathe and remove our thought process from let me say that again. When we sit down to breathe and allow the thought process to exhaust itself through our observing the breath, we occupy the conscious aspect of our mind with one thing, and then we let the yammering go on and on and on in the background. Eventually, that yammering will start to quiet down enough so that we can begin to have the clarity to then receive the answers that we're looking for. And that in itself is a conscious sort of activism. That in itself is being a rebel, but with a cause. Because as we are right now, with the status quo of things, people only know how to go in one direction. And that direction is, in reality, confusion. Because honestly, nobody really knows what's going on within their own minds for the most part.
Yeah.
We all jump from this way to that way to this way to that way. We wake up in the morning and we feel great. We spill our coffee and we feel terrible. Somebody compliments us and we feel great. We bump into somebody in traffic and we feel terrible. And we just go back and forth and back and forth. And we have no control over what's going on inside of ourselves. But when we make a conscious effort to just sit and breathe and observe that breath, then what's happening is we get out of our own way. And when we get out of our own way, then the being sees its opportunity to step back into the driver's seat and then direct us throughout our life, direct us throughout the day with everything from mundane decisions to the most important decisions we could ever make. And then we would know how to act and what to say, and that is what changes the world around us. And as we allow the being to start to take the driver's seat within our own life, then what happens is, by natural consequence and by the law of attraction as well, the being within others start to become activated, because that being sees the light within ourselves. It's kind of like when the Buddha first reached enlightenment. He woke up and he saw the Buddha within everybody. And he was like, well, look, you're all Buddhas. And they're like, no, hold on, wait a minute. We can't see that. But he could. He was seeing himself in them. Kind of like, exactly like what Carlos was talking about in your first ever Gnostic conversation. When we see in others ourselves and ourselves only. But because right now, what we end up seeing through is the ego, all we see is darkness within everybody. We can't see their own light because we're not looking through our light.
Right.
And what happens is, because we're living in the darkness, we then have what's known as the psychological side of the moon, which is even deeper within ourselves. And so we see the worst in people, because whether we realize it or not, that's what we're looking through. And so we have no option but to see that in other people. But when we stop and purposely make ourselves sit down to practice 5 minutes a day, but every day, just 5 minutes, let that grow into 6 minutes, grow into 10 minutes, grow into an hour, however long it takes to get that far, let it grow on its own. But we have to make that initial effort. And this is how it's done. When we make that initial effort, then the being steps into our life. And it's so interesting, Christian, because I've come to realize it took me a lot of years. I mean, I was doing something for a little while there, but it took me a lot of years to really step into my own personal work. I mean, of course, when we first start, everybody has the starry eyes and the beauty of everything. We have we have those minor experiences which initiate us into the work because it's what help us to enjoy the processes. But then we hit a moment where we actually have to start doing something. And for a very long time, I didn't realize that the thing that we need to do most is get out of our own way. We get in our own way. We get in the way of the being. And if we would just step back and allow the being to do the work within us, then the work takes over itself. And all we have to continually do is be present. That's our job. Because what we think we need to do is we think we need to, mentally understand the process. And we think that we need to, physically change this and physically change that. And yes, in some cases we have to. If we're a major drug addict and we can't function in life, we probably should stop so that we can start to function. But, or, if I'm sure nobody listening is in this condition, but if we're a mass murderer, we probably should stop murdering people in order to start doing our own work. However, for the most part, we continue on with our life the way it is. And we observe what's going on. Because only in doing that can we then start to understand how to undo that. But we think we need to stop everything as it is and make ourselves perfect as we are, or make ourselves perfect to then begin to work. But no, Jesus said, I don't remember the exact words, but he says, you come to me as sinners. And that's the way that it should happen. I come to save the sinners. It's not the saints or something like that. I can't remember it exactly. But if we were saints, why would we need this?
Right.
We are here because we are in the condition we're in, and we can only truly understand that condition when we stop and observe, rather than trying to change everything about ourselves. And you said it takes courage. Yes, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of patience, because honestly, when we do start to look inside of the hidden side of our psychological moon, we're going to see a lot of things that we don't like. Even just beginning to glance within our own mind, we see things that we don't like. Most of the time, we don't even know it's there because we're ignoring it. We're getting involved in sports, or we're getting involved in a hobby, or we're getting involved in, whatever it is that we use to distract ourselves. But the moment we stop distracting ourselves, we start to see things which we may not like very much. And we will start to see other things which we probably will like, that we then have to learn also how to keep in balance. Because one thing that I constantly have to remind myself is that, yes, I've got a lot of darkness and a lot of negative things inside of me, but there's also just as much light. There's the being. It's our very nature. Deep down in our core, we are the being. And that's what the Buddha has come to show us. That's what Jesus Christ came to show us. And Krishna, and Quetzalcoatl, and Huitzilopochtli, and all of them. They've come to show us that that's exactly what we are deep down in our very own nature. And if we can learn to get out of our own way, then we will start to see how karma takes effect in our life, how the law of attraction is drawing to us these situations which we don't want to have a part of our life anymore. We will start to see how deep down within the hidden side of our psychological moon, we are the cause of our own issues. Nobody else. All these people that we fight against, you stop what you're doing so that I can feel better about myself. No. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it's our job to step back and honestly just observe it. Just step back and observe it. And through that observation, the intelligence of the being is going to direct us in how to undo the issues that we've done within ourselves. Yeah.
And thank you, Sean. And you said a couple of things, and I want to address one of them first, just to build up on it, because we just had a question which I think exactly relates to what we're saying in this moment from Adina. She's one of our students. She asked, when we see things we don't like, what do we do? Internally coming up to those things triggers dark response. And I think this, this question relates to what you were saying as far as connecting with the being to see, right? And also with this lecture, with this other Gnostic conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago, in which we talked about the being, and we said that the importance of the being in our lives, that we need to see ourselves from the perspective of the being, from the consciousness. And Master Samael gives a wonderful practice, and I love the title of the practice. The meditation practice is called intimate self-observation, or intimate, and also he also calls it intimate psychoanalysis. Mm-hmm. And so I love that he brings the word, instead of just psychoanalysis, which is basically the mind looking at the mind, or the ego, the darkness looking at this darkness and saying, "Oh, I don't like this darkness over here," and you feel negative and you feel shame, because it's an aspect of your conditioning that is looking at other aspects that society says that it's bad. And so from this perspective, from this mental, I'm going to call it intellectual analysis, you only see this in you. But without the intimate, which is where the intimate is psychoanalyzing himself, then you as the light, you as the being actually says, "Oh, wow, look at this. I do have this within myself. And I should fix that, because I'm not all that. I'm actually this, but it is a temporary manifestation of myself that is not necessarily true. It's not necessarily expressing my true essence." And so what is it about that is, or what is it about life in that moment that's not allowing me to manifest myself as I truly am? Love, compassionate, kind, wise being, right? And so then I think, that's a wonderful tool, and we call it Gnosis ontology, right? Then the necessity to go beyond psychology and bring the ontological part to the work, because psychology can only take us to a certain degree. And I've mentioned this before, and I don't want to go too in depth into it, but it relates to what you were saying, right? About, this wonderful realization that the Buddha has, that now, after connecting with his true essence, now he begins to see the world through that pure essence, through that oneness, through that soul. And now, oh, okay, you're actually all Buddhas, right? Yes. And so you look at your, quote unquote enemy, or, that person that annoys you all the time. And you say, okay, there is a soul within that person that transcends this little egoic action, because that's another thing. We tend to just narrow the complexity of a human being into just a few small behaviors that we observe, ignoring that at home that person is a loving, kind being with his family, and another thing that I definitely wanted to bring up before we run out of time is this beautiful comprehension that I had in relation to everything that's happening in the world right now. And specifically, I sat down, obviously, after this video emerged of George Floyd, and I sat down to meditate, and I'm thinking, what is the esoteric purpose of all of this, right? why do bad things happen to good people, right? And then I'm thinking, and then this realization comes, remember that there is another law that is innate in creation, which is the law of sacrifice. And the law of sacrifice from a Gnostic perspective is sacro officio from the Latin, which is sacred duty. And so if we observe the world around us, we are invited to see that everything that you create, just like everything you create, implies some sacrifice in which you are giving something or transforming an inferior type of energy into a superior type of energy. And so obviously we all feel sad and angry when we see this, when we watch this video and we see this news, but then it's like, what else can I see here? And for a moment, I actually saw George Floyd as not just a victim, but as someone that is almost like a martyr that gave his life so that we can wake up as a society and see, hey, there is something going on here, and we're all responsible, and we need to do something about it, right? And so in that moment, I thought, wow, how can I honor then that sacrifice that soul has done? How can I honor the sacrifice that of my own parents raising us, going through so much sacrifice? How can I honor on a cosmic level the sacrifice, right, that gods, monads, beings, souls have done coming into creation, as you said, leaving that state of being, leaving nirvana or the absolute, where everything is love and unity and peace. And for some reason, some beings decide that they want to come into creation to create a scenario that will help each one of us to learn and grow. And so, I just, this is sort of, it impacted me because I thought, like, well, if you go to school, right, you go because you want to learn. And there are so many people working behind the scenes, the janitors, the teachers, you know, creating that scenario so that you have the opportunity to learn. And when you go there and you learn, right, what's the best way to pay them back for their sacrifice, to honor their sacrifice, is by embodying what you were there to learn, right? To embody love, right? To embody the being. And so that was such a wonderful realization and really just an inspiration, right? To really work harder on myself, to really observe, right, those things, because again, it's when we enter the work, I think most of us think that I'm entering this path because it's for me, right? I want to be happy. I'm looking for my own happiness. Right. I want to be a better person. But as you go deeper into the work, and I think this is the reason why, you and I and your wife Tracy, we decided to become Gnostic missionaries, because at some point we realized it's more than me. And sure, I can be doing my work, and that obviously that helps. But at some point, we start sharing all of our knowledge with those around us, because we see that if I'm doing the work, I need to help others do the work. And we all do this in our own way, right? And by each one of us doing our own work, like you said, you begin to embody that new light. That's the being. And now that light begins to shine, and your family members, your friends are like, there's something different about you, right? What is it?
Exactly.
Some of them won't like it because you change your life, and it's, nobody wants change. Everyone's afraid of change. But some, will say, wow, you've become someone different, and there's something about this new you that I like. And so, this is wonderful, because you begin to see that it's definitely worth all the work, not because you're becoming happier, more peaceful, but because you're inspiring others to change. And I think obviously this is sort of the most rewarding thing about what we do, which I think you agree.
I agree 100%. And you're right. It's funny, when we do first find the teachings, however we find it, we tend to find it because we want to do better ourselves. We want to make ourselves a better person. And however long it may take, we begin to realize, like you said, we actually discovered the teachings not for ourselves and not to become better, but for everybody. And because something's not quite right, and we're going to change it, not for better or worse, but just change it.
Right.
Because things are the way they are, and we don't want them to be that way anymore. We can feel that something's a little off. And then, as you know, right now, with the major circumstances that have been happening this year, everybody starts to see that things are a little off. Everybody starts to wake up with these occurrences that happen through the sacrifice of people like, you know, George Floyd or the countless others who have gone through the same situations. And this again can bring us back around a little bit to karma, because these things all have, you know, not dual effects but multiple effects. The coronavirus, for instance, there are multiple things that can come out of that. One, it can help some of us pay off karma that we owe. Two, it can help some of us to wake up, realize that something's not right here. I mean, when something that big happens to us, then we must realize that something's not right. And everybody is stirred to one degree or another. Now, some people just clamp right back down and, you know, instead of using the opportunity to reflect, they, you know, sometimes we clamp right back down and then we complain about having to stay in our homes, or, you know, oh, you know, this isn't working or that's not working or whatever it might be. And then some people are actually use the opportunity to allow those reflections to blossom within them and become something more, something that can then begin to affect a change worldwide.
Sean,
and, yes,
sorry, I'm going to stop you right there because
okay.
I just got a notification from Instagram that we're going to be kicked out in like 10 seconds.
Okay.
So let me just end this on Instagram, and we'll come right back in just a minute, okay? So we can finish with the reflections. Okay, cool. So if you don't mind just going back in there, I'm going to go live again. All right, I'm back. So whenever you're ready.
I am, okay. I think I went, okay, there we go. Perfect. Yeah. I am actually back on with Instagram.
I wish they gave me more time than like 20 seconds.
Sorry, say that again. Oh, there we go. Yep, there we go. Perfect. Okay. Excellent.
All right. Wonder. I wish they gave me more time than like 20 seconds. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it's interesting too that you know, these two major events happened in the same year and right around the same time, because they both have become worldwide events. I mean, the coronavirus is still, it's interesting too the way karma takes place, because it doesn't just happen all at once. The entire planet didn't get sick at the same time. There was like a wave of sickness that is still making its way around the planet. Brazil's still getting worse, for instance. It's making its way into the Amazon, and Africa is starting to get pretty bad itself. So it's still kind of waving itself around. And then at the same time, or directly afterwards, and also partly due to the circumstances that we were in as well, this whole thing with George Floyd took place starting in America. And now we know that there are protests worldwide. I mean, they're in Australia, they're in Rome, they're in Scotland. And so, but these things have multiple purposes. Again, the George Floyd protests they help deal out karma to some people, because some people who were just starting to get over the coronavirus, then their business is shut down due to the coronavirus, then lose it due to the protests. You know, it got burned down or looted or whatever. But also, okay, so there's that side of it. But then also, it's another opportunity for us to really wake up, open our eyes, and see what's going on in the world around us. And the way to be, okay, so our eyes, let's say for the moment that our eyes become open, we see the injustice, we see the sickness, whatever it might be that we're looking at. Then what do we do? We see it. Where do we go from there? And that is, again, where we want to stop and breathe. We want to bring ourselves into the silence to the best of our abilities. I'll tell you, Christian, one thing that I love most about the Gnostic society that we belong to is Mo Chao. It took me a very long time to really start to connect with Mo Chao and what it means, what it can do. But Mo Chao is that practice that that the only thing we have to do is be present and let the practice guide itself. Now we can use tools to get into that presence. We use breathing, we use a small mantra, but then eventually that moves into silence. And then it's then in that silence that our answers and our directions come to us. And it may not come to us like flashing neon signs. It may come to us as we're done with our practice. 4 days later, due to this practice, we're cooking our dinner, and all of a sudden we get an intuition to call our mom or whatever it might be. But it's in that silence that we then start to connect with the Buddhic principle within us, the Christic principle within us, the principle of the being within us. And then that guides us and that directs us, separate from the mind. And of course, the mind is going to take whatever reflections we receive and it's going to try to do whatever it wants to with them. And you know what? That's okay, because that's what the mind does. It's what it's meant to do, at least as it is right now. But with continual efforts toward reaching silence, it then begins to construct within us the foundation, which will then tell us exactly how to behave in situations like major worldwide protests or pandemics, or if a war broke out or whatever it might be. That silence will guide us through whatever we need to be guided through. Tracy and I always return back to that principle. That principle of silence is what we want to reach. And we can't, it's interesting, and I won't go too much further, because I know that we're kind of running out of time, but okay, I know for myself, this is the way that it started for me with understanding what silence is. And I know also that for a lot of our students throughout the years, we've seen them go through these same processes. But we think we have to empty the mind. We think that that's what silence is. And that's not real silence. That's like a false sort of silence. What we need to do is just, and I've said it probably a dozen times already in this talk, sit and breathe.
It's
That's
just
how
so
we're
simple.
it's as simple as that. Everything we will ever need to know comes from that process of observing life here and now. And the breath is the one thing that is with us all the time. It's never in the past, it's never in the future. Our breath is here. And when we stop and close our eyes and just follow the processes of breathing, the method of meditation will naturally reveal itself to us. The things that we need to comprehend in that moment will start to present themselves to us. And then through that presentation of it, and through our awareness of what we're doing right here and right now, we're going to start to observe it. And then it's going to unpack itself for us. And then when it unpacks itself, that silence touches it, and that is the depth. Because when the silence of the being touches that which unpacked itself for us, that which got unpacked cannot sustain the energy of the silence, and it dissolves then and there. And then from then, we continue moving forward with our lives, and the reflections that, and it's funny too, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I got to remember that. I have to remember this, that just came to my brain, and I work to make sure that stays in my head. But that's actually not the way we do it either, because the being is so intelligent that when we're ready for that which was just unpacked and dissolved, it's going to show up at the right time.
Right.
It's such a beautiful and simple process. I love it. I love it. And it's Mo Chow that
Yeah.
started that started to help me truly comprehend what our internal work is.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Sean. For those of first of all, for those of you that don't know what Mo Chao means, is as he was trying to say, it's basically silent, self-guided meditation, where the self begins to guide the meditation. Your higher self begins to guide you, and all you have to do is just allow for that being to come in and say, "Hey, let me take care of this." And also like the practice of surrendering in the Christian tradition, right? Just to surrender to the being, and he'll take care of you. And I have one student saying here that yeah, just like we've been teaching in meditation, that the silence. And I came to realize when I began to study this, the program that we use in our school to teach, right? We have the first chamber program in which we talk about so many topics, uh, Gnosticism, what's Gnosticism, occult psychology, karma, dharma, the mysteries of life and death, astral projections, ancient civilizations, right? Um,
Yeah.
the initiatic path, esotericism, and then meditation chamber. So many, and I'm looking at all this, and when I go to class number 12, learning how to listen, which we just talked about with the group, like this is the center of gravity of this entire program. Lesson 12. And what we're telling students, again, is we just have to learn to develop the ability to listen. And if those of you that never heard this lesson, I recommend you can email us, and we can share this wonderful lecture by Samuel Vior, which is taken from a book. I believe it's from the um, Fundamentals of Education, right? Or
Fundamental education. Yeah, I think
yeah.
you're right.
And he says we just need to learn how to listen. When you do that, you when you begin to do that, you open up, and now you can take in more than what you previously could, and that leads you to comprehension. It leads you to understanding, right? And uh, realizing again the interconnectedness, the connection that you have with everything. And so um, yeah, I don't know. Wonderful. I really I've really been enjoying these conversations, and how also they have been sort of connecting with each one of the topics that we've been covering. And um, so yeah, and I think there's just one more thing that I would like to throw out there if we have time, which is again this concept of um, the concept of the concept of dharma, right? To really, which is the result of that being into that listening state, right? Being in entering into that mo chao, that which translates to serene reflection, right? To serene our mind and just make the mind receptive, so that the dharma, the knowledge uh, through which we can liberate ourselves from karma, can be revealed to us, right? And so, and again, I love that very appropriate background that you have, um, because that's it. That's it. That's how the dharma is received. That's how liberation is attained. And and while you're there, like the Buddha, you might see that Buddha there with his eyes closed, and sort of you think he's very much into himself, but it's even counterintuitive for our Western perspective, right? That someone in that state is actually even more connected to the world and life
Yeah.
than we are with our eyes open. you
Right.
know
You
um
know, one of my favorite book series is the C.S. Lewis Chronicles of Narnia series.
mm,
And the very last book of that series, some of the very last lines in that book, so from the very beginning all the way to the very end, I'm talking, there is actually where the kids return to Narnia, but not Narnia, but um, basically they're returning to heaven. They have to go into this place, which is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Mm.
And what Aslan keeps saying to them over and over again is further in and further up, further in and further up. And it's such a beautiful principle because that's exactly what you're talking about right there.
Amazing.
Yes, the Buddha or anybody who's meditating looks like they may just be self-centered, but due to our very nature, connecting inside actually brings us into connection with the nature of everything else around us. And
Right.
this is how we come to understand the mysteries of anything we want to understand, really.
Right. Yeah, and we talk about the universal mind in Gnosis, and all of our minds are connected, and even going back to the Hermetic Principles, right? The all is one, and or all is mind, right? And that in that sense, we say Gnosis, we are all consciousness, or the all is consciousness rather than just mind, right? Or we can call it conscious mind. Um, and yeah, all right. I think we could end here. If there
All
are
right.
any questions from anyone, please let us know. Thank you again for joining us. If any of you are in the Miami area, Sean and his wife Tracy have a Gnostic school there, and if you want to join them, please follow them on Instagram. You see they're on Miami Gnosis.
Yeah,
That's them.
feel free.
Um, Feel free to get in touch with them, and if you lose this, you can get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with them. They're also right now, I believe you have an introduction to Gnosis program going on,
We do,
right?
yeah. The first chamber series is going on tomorrow night, actually, where we're going to be talking about the universal mind tomorrow
Oh, wonderful. Okay,
night.
so yeah, that's one of my all-time favorites of in those topics in first chamber. So yeah,
Yeah,
all right, I highly recommend you guys connect with Sean, Tracy, and again, thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. We're also going through the program if you're over here in New York. um, and yeah, thank you again, Sean. Thank you for joining us. And
yeah. Thank you for having me. It was pretty great, Christian. Thank you,
awesome.
and
All
thanks
right.
also to everybody who is listening. And good luck to you all, and stay safe and stay healthy and keep going inside.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you. All right, everyone. Take care. See you.